The private terminal at Ninoy Aquino International Airport buzzed with quiet efficiency as Manny Pacquiao made his way through the exclusive lounge. He had just finished a grueling week of charity events across Manila, visiting orphanages and speaking at schools about perseverance and dreams. The weight of exhaustion pressed against his shoulders, but the warmth in his heart from touching so many young lives kept him moving forward. His security detail, led by his longtime friend Manny, maintained a respectful distance as they prepared for the flight to Cebu, where another foundation event awaited him the following day. As Manny settled into his business class seat, he noticed the unusual bustle of activity around him. The flight attendant, a kind woman named Ligaya, approached with an apologetic smile and explained that due to an overbooking situation, they would need to accommodate a few additional passengers in the business section. Manny nodded without hesitation, understanding that sometimes life requires flexibility and compassion. He had learned long ago that true strength came not from demanding special treatment, but from extending grace to others when circumstances became challenging. The boarding process continued, with its typical rhythm of rolling luggage and hushed conversations. Manny pulled out his phone to send a quick message to Jinky, letting her know about the delayed departure, and that he would call the children before bedtime. The familiar ache of missing his family tugged at his chest, a constant companion during his travels. Princess had a school presentation the next week, and he had promised to help her practice her speech about Filipino heroes. The irony was not lost on him that she had chosen him as her subject, though he still struggled to see himself as anything more than a kid from General Santos who got lucky. A commotion near the boarding gate caught his attention as airport staff worked to resolve some last-minute passenger arrangements. Through the window, he could see ground crews preparing the aircraft under the orange glow of the setting Manila sun. The familiar pre-flight routine reminded him of countless journeys he had taken, from small regional flights to his earliest training camps to international destinations for the biggest fights of his career. Each flight had carried different dreams, different fears, and different versions of himself as he evolved from a hungry young fighter into the man he was today. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing a brief delay due to air traffic control requirements. Manny used the extra time to review some documents for the foundation, scanning through reports about their latest educational initiatives in rural communities. The numbers told stories of children who now had access to books, computers, and hope where none had existed before. He thought about his own childhood, when the idea of flying anywhere seemed as impossible as touching the stars. Now these flights were routine, but the mission they served felt more important than any championship belt he had ever worn. As the final passengers boarded, Manny noticed a small figure being guided down the aisle by one of the flight attendants. A young girl, no more than 8 years old, clutched a worn backpack and looked around with wide, curious eyes. Her simple clothing and the careful way she carried herself reminded him instantly of his own children when they were younger, full of wonder, but trying to appear brave in new situations. Something about her presence immediately drew his attention, though he could not yet understand why this particular moment would soon change the entire trajectory of his evening. The flight attendant guided the young girl directly to the seat beside Manny, her small hands gripping the armrest as she settled into the unfamiliar luxury of business class. Her name tag, partially visible on her backpack, read Mayumi in careful childish handwriting. She glanced sideways at Manny with a mixture of shyness and recognition, her dark eyes reflecting a maturity that seemed far beyond her years. The attendant, Ligaya, leaned down to ensure Mayumi understood the safety procedures and how to call for assistance if needed. Manny watched this interaction with growing curiosity about what circumstances had brought this child to be traveling alone in business class. Mayumi carefully placed her backpack under the seat in front of her, revealing a small notebook that she clutched protectively against her chest. The cover was decorated with hand-drawn boxing gloves and stick figures that appeared to be in fighting poses. When she noticed Manny observing her artwork, she quickly turned the notebook face down, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. The gesture reminded him of his own children's shy moments when caught pursuing their secret dreams and aspirations. He wondered what stories lay within those pages and what had inspired such young hands to draw images of boxing. As the aircraft began its taxi toward the runway, Manny decided to break the ice with gentle conversation. He introduced himself simply, without fanfare or mention of his achievements, speaking in the warm, approachable manner that had endeared him to millions of fans worldwide. Mayumi responded with polite but cautious answers, revealing that she was traveling to Cebu to stay with her grandmother while her mother worked in Dubai as a domestic helper. The familiar story of overseas Filipino workers touched Manny's heart, knowing intimately the sacrifices families made to pursue better opportunities abroad. The takeoff proceeded smoothly, and as Manila's lights grew smaller below them, Mayumi pressed her face to the window with childlike wonder. She whispered something about never having flown before and how everything looked like tiny toys from up high. Manny found himself smiling at her innocent observations, remembering his own first flight and the overwhelming sensation of leaving the ground behind. He began sharing gentle stories about different cities he had visited, describing them in ways that would capture a child's imagination without overwhelming her with details about the complex adult world of professional boxing. During the beverage service, Mayumi politely declined anything more elaborate than water, and Manny noticed her careful attention to not taking anything that might cost extra money. The observation struck him deeply. Recognizing the ingrained frugality that comes from genuine financial hardship, he discreetly arranged with Ligaya to ensure Mayumi received some snacks and a juice box, framing it as standard service rather than special treatment. The small gesture reflected his own understanding of childhood hunger and the importance of maintaining dignity while providing care. As they reached cruising altitude, Mayumi began to relax slightly, though she continued to clutch her notebook with protective intensity. The soft hum of the engines created an intimate atmosphere that seemed to encourage quiet conversation. Manny sensed that beneath her polite exterior lay a story worth hearing, and he prepared himself to listen with the patience and compassion that had been shaped by his own journey from poverty to prominence. Little did he know that the next few minutes would reveal a connection more profound than anything he could have imagined. The gentle turbulence of the flight created a natural pause in their conversation, and during this quiet moment, Mayumi's grip on her notebook loosened slightly. A corner of a page became visible, revealing more detailed drawings than Manny had initially noticed. The sketches showed clear attention to form and technique, with figures demonstrating proper boxing stances and defensive positions. The accuracy of the illustrations surprised him, as they demonstrated knowledge that went far beyond casual observation of the sport. He wondered where such a young child could have learned these technical details, and what motivated her to capture them so precisely. Mayumi noticed his interest and, after a moment of internal debate, slowly opened the notebook to reveal pages filled with boxing sketches, training routines written in careful script, and what appeared to be newspaper clippings glued carefully onto the pages. The collection told the story of someone who had been studying boxing with serious dedication, despite her young age and obvious financial constraints. Each page revealed a deeper level of commitment and understanding than Manny had expected to find. The notebook was clearly her most treasured possession, containing dreams and aspirations that she had been nurturing in private. One particular page caught Manny's attention as it contained a detailed timeline of his own career, with major fights marked in colorful markers and small personal notes written in the margins. The research was surprisingly thorough, showing not just fight results but personal details about his family, his foundation work, and quotes from interviews about overcoming poverty. Mayumi had clearly spent considerable time and effort compiling this information, treating it with the reverence of a dedicated student studying her most important subject. The level of detail demonstrated a connection that went far beyond casual fandom. As Mayumi turned the pages, she began explaining her drawings with growing confidence, describing different fighting techniques and strategies she had learned from watching training videos online at the local internet cafe. Her voice carried the passion of someone who had found their calling, despite circumstances that seemed to make pursuing that calling nearly impossible. She spoke about studying footage of classic fights, breaking down combinations and defensive movements, and practicing shadow boxing in her small room when her mother was at work. The dedication in her voice reminded Manny of his own early hunger to learn everything possible about the sport. The conversation took a more personal turn when Mayumi revealed that boxing represented more than just a sport to her. She explained how watching Manny's fights gave her hope during the long months when her mother was away working overseas, and how his story of rising from poverty felt like a roadmap for her own dreams. She had memorized his early struggles, his training sacrifices, and his commitment to helping other Filipino children achieve their potential. For her, boxing was not about violence or aggression, but about the possibility of transformation and the power of refusing to accept limitations imposed by circumstances. As the notebook tour continued, Manny realized he was witnessing something extraordinary. This young girl had created her own comprehensive boxing education, driven by pure passion and determination, despite having no access to formal training, equipment, or guidance. Her notebook represented years of self-directed learning, hope, and preparation for opportunities that might never come. The depth of her commitment and the sophistication of her understanding began to stir emotions in Manny that he had not expected to feel on what was supposed to be a routine flight to another charity event. Mayumi's voice grew quieter as she turned to a section of her notebook filled with personal goals and training schedules she had created for herself. Each page revealed the methodical planning of someone who approached their dreams with scientific precision, despite having no formal coaching or resources. She had written detailed workout routines using bodyweight exercises, calculated nutrition plans based on whatever healthy food her small budget could afford, and even created a mental training section with notes about visualization and positive thinking. The sophistication of her self-coaching impressed Manny more than any professional training manual he had ever reviewed. The most touching section contained letters she had written but never sent, addressed to various boxing trainers and gyms, asking for opportunities to train or even just to observe workouts. Each letter was carefully crafted with perfect handwriting, expressing her willingness to work in exchange for instruction and her promises to be the most dedicated student they had ever taught. The rejection letters she had received were carefully preserved alongside her hopeful applications, creating a heartbreaking timeline of doors that had been closed to her because of her age, gender, and financial circumstances. Manny listened as Mayumi described her daily routine, waking up at 5 in the morning to practice shadowboxing before school, using textbooks as makeshift weights, and running through the narrow streets of her neighborhood before the traffic became too heavy. She had memorized dozens of boxing combinations and could recite the training philosophies of famous coaches word for word. Her dedication reminded him powerfully of his own early years, when hunger and determination were his only coaches, and hope was his most reliable training partner. The conversation took an even deeper turn when Mayumi revealed her ultimate dream of opening a boxing gym for underprivileged children in her community. She had observed how many of her classmates had no positive outlets for their energy and frustration, and she believed that boxing could provide the same sense of purpose and direction that it had given her through the notebook and videos. Her vision extended beyond personal success to community transformation, showing a maturity and social consciousness that amazed Manny. She had even sketched floor plans for her imaginary gym and written detailed programs for different age groups. As she spoke about her mother's sacrifices working overseas to pay for her education, Mayumi's voice wavered slightly with emotion. She explained how she hid her boxing dreams from her mother, fearing that they would be seen as impractical or dangerous for a young girl from their circumstances. The boxing notebook was her secret companion, a place where she could nurture aspirations that felt too fragile to share with anyone else. She had been carrying these dreams alone, supporting herself with the belief that somewhere, somehow, an opportunity would eventually present itself. The weight of Mayumi's story began to settle in Manny's chest as he recognized the profound courage it took to maintain such dedication without encouragement, resources, or realistic prospects for advancement. Her determination reminded him not just of his own journey, but of thousands of Filipino children who possessed incredible potential but lacked access to opportunities that could help them flourish. He realized that sitting beside him was not just a young boxing fan, but a testament to the power of dreams to survive and grow, even in the most challenging circumstances. Listening to Mayumi's story transported Manny back to his own childhood in General Santos, where poverty had been a constant companion and dreams seemed like luxury items his family could not afford. He remembered the gnawing hunger that made concentration in school nearly impossible, and how boxing had initially appealed to him not as a sport, but as a potential source of income to help feed his family. The parallels between his journey and Mayumi's current situation were so striking that he felt as though he was looking at a younger version of himself, full of the same desperate hope and unwavering determination. The memories came flooding back with unexpected intensity as he recalled his own makeshift training sessions, using whatever materials he could find or improvise. He had punched banana trees until his knuckles bled, used rocks as weights, and practiced combinations in empty lots while other children played games he could not afford to join. Like Mayumi, he had been largely self-taught in the beginning, learning from observation and repetition rather than formal instruction. The similarity of their experiences created a connection that transcended the physical space of the airplane seat and reached into the shared understanding of what it meant to dream beyond one's circumstances. Manny thought about his mother, Dionysia, who had watched his early training with a mixture of pride and concern, unsure whether to encourage his boxing aspirations or worry about the dangers they might bring. He remembered her quiet sacrifices, working multiple jobs to keep the family afloat, while he pursued what must have seemed like an impossible dream. The parallel to Mayumi's mother working overseas, while her daughter secretly nurtured her own boxing ambitions, was almost too poignant to bear. Both mothers had made incredible sacrifices, trusting that their children would find ways to transform hardship into opportunity. The emotional weight of these memories was intensified by his knowledge of how the story had unfolded for him, and his awareness of how rare and unlikely his success had been. For every Manny Pacquiao who emerged from poverty to international prominence, there were thousands of equally talented and determined children whose dreams never found the right combination of opportunity, timing, and support needed to flourish. Sitting beside Mayumi, he felt the enormous responsibility that came with his success and the obligation to ensure that other young dreamers would not have to rely solely on luck and circumstance. He remembered the pivotal moments in his own journey when strangers had shown him kindness, when coaches had taken chances on an unknown kid from the provinces, and when opportunities had appeared just when his hope was beginning to fade. Each of these moments had been gifts that he could never fully repay, but perhaps he could pass forward. The realization that he might be positioned to become one of those pivotal figures in Mayumi's story began to form in his mind, though he was not yet sure what form that intervention might take. As these memories and emotions swirled through his consciousness, Manny found himself fighting back tears that threatened to overwhelm his composure. The combination of recognition, empathy, and possibility created an emotional storm that he had not experienced in years. He realized that this chance encounter was far more than a pleasant conversation with a young fan, but rather a moment that demanded action, commitment, and the kind of courage that had defined the most important decisions of his life. The aircraft's cabin had grown quieter as most passengers settled into their evening routines, creating an intimate atmosphere that seemed to encourage deeper conversation. Mayumi had been speaking for nearly an hour, sharing dreams and struggles with an honesty that both impressed and moved Manny beyond words. As she reached the final pages of her notebook, her voice took on a different quality, less excited and more vulnerable, as though she was approaching something she had never shared with anyone before. The trust she was placing in him felt both precious and weighty, demanding his complete attention and respect. In the last section of her notebook, Mayumi had written what appeared to be a letter, but unlike the others, this one was addressed simply to "my hero." As she began reading it aloud, her voice started strong but gradually became more emotional with each word. The letter described her daily struggles with loneliness, while her mother worked overseas, her frustration with the limitations imposed by poverty, and her fear that her dreams might be too big for someone like her to achieve. She wrote about watching his fights late at night on her neighbor's television, feeling inspired by his victories, but also overwhelmed by the distance between his success and her current reality. The letter continued with Mayumi describing how she had used his story as a source of strength during her most difficult moments, imagining conversations with him when she felt like giving up on her training or her education. She had memorized his quotes about perseverance and hard work, repeating them to herself when the weight of her circumstances threatened to crush her spirit. She wrote about seeing him not just as a boxer, but as proof that Filipino children from poor families could achieve extraordinary things if they refused to surrender their dreams to their circumstances. As Mayumi read the final paragraph of her letter, her voice began to break with emotion. She had written about her biggest fear, which was not failing to become a boxer, but failing to become someone who could help other children the way his example had helped her. She dreamed of using boxing not just as a path to personal success, but as a vehicle for lifting up her entire community and showing other young girls that their dreams were valid regardless of traditional expectations or financial limitations. The maturity and selflessness of her vision overwhelmed Manny with its purity and ambition. The letter concluded with Mayumi expressing gratitude for the inspiration his life had provided, even though they had never met. She thanked him for showing her that greatness was possible for kids like her, and for proving that success without forgetting your roots was not only possible, but necessary. She wrote about hoping that someday she might have the chance to tell him personally how much his example had meant to her, never imagining that this conversation was actually happening. The innocence and sincerity of her words created an emotional moment that neither of them had anticipated. As Mayumi finished reading and looked up at Manny with tears beginning to form in her eyes, the full impact of their encounter hit him like a physical force. This child had just shared her deepest dreams, fears, and gratitude with the very person who had unknowingly shaped her entire worldview. The responsibility and opportunity inherent in this moment felt overwhelming, and Manny realized that his response to her trust would likely influence the trajectory of her life. The airplane cabin seemed to fade away as he prepared to speak words that would matter more than any he had ever uttered in a boxing ring. The silence that followed Mayumi's reading stretched for several heartbeats as Manny struggled to find words adequate to the moment. Tears had begun streaming down his cheeks, and he made no effort to hide them as he processed the profound impact of what he had just heard. This young girl had unknowingly articulated the very purpose that had driven him throughout his career, the desire to prove that circumstances of birth need not determine the boundaries of possibility. Her dreams were not just personal aspirations, but a continuation of the same mission that had motivated every fight, every training session, and every charitable endeavor of his adult life. Manny reached into his travel bag and retrieved a small notebook of his own, one that he used for jotting down ideas for his foundation work and personal reflections during flights. With careful deliberation, he tore out a clean page and began writing while Mayumi watched with curious eyes. He wrote his personal phone number, his foundation's contact information, and the name of his head trainer, along with a brief note authorizing her to contact any of them directly. The simple act of writing felt momentous, as though he was drafting a contract that would bind him to honor the trust this child had placed in him. As he handed her the paper, Manny began speaking in a voice thick with emotion about the courage she had shown in pursuing her dreams despite every obstacle imaginable. He told her that in his many years of boxing and meeting people around the world, he had rarely encountered someone with such pure dedication and sophisticated understanding of what it meant to transform struggle into strength. Her notebook represented more than childhood dreams. It was evidence of the kind of character and commitment that formed the foundation of true champions, regardless of the arena in which they competed. Manny shared with Mayumi that her story had reminded him why he had fallen in love with boxing in the first place, and why his foundation work felt more important than any championship he had ever won. He explained that meeting young people like her recharged his sense of purpose and confirmed that his success carried responsibilities that extended far beyond personal achievement. Her dreams were not too big. They were exactly the right size for someone with her heart, intelligence, and determination. What she needed was not smaller dreams, but bigger opportunities to pursue them. The conversation took on a different energy as Manny began outlining concrete steps that could help Mayumi develop her boxing skills and pursue her goal of creating opportunities for other children. He spoke about training facilities, scholarship programs, and mentorship networks that his foundation had established specifically to identify and support young people like her. What had begun as a chance encounter was transforming into the beginning of a relationship that could alter the trajectory of not just her life, but potentially the lives of countless other children in her community. As the airplane began its descent towards Cebu, Manny realized that this flight had become one of the most significant journeys of his life, despite covering the same route he had traveled dozens of times before. Mayumi had reminded him that his greatest victories were not won in boxing rings, but in moments like this when he could use his platform to recognize and nurture the potential that poverty often kept hidden. The tears on his cheeks had dried, but the emotional transformation sparked by her trust and courage would remain with him long after the plane touched down. The captain's announcement about their final approach to Cebu created a sense of urgency around their conversation, as both Manny and Mayumi realized that their extraordinary encounter was drawing to a close. However, rather than feeling like an ending, the impending arrival felt like the beginning of something significant and transformative. Manny made several more notes in his notebook, including contact information for coaches, training facilities, and educational programs that could help Mayumi pursue both her boxing dreams and her academic goals without having to choose between them. As the aircraft touched down and began taxiing to the gate, Manny explained to Mayumi that her grandmother in Cebu lived only 30 minutes from one of the best youth boxing programs in the Philippines, a facility his foundation had helped establish 3 years earlier. The coincidence felt like destiny intervening to ensure that opportunities would be available exactly where and when she needed them. He promised to call the program director that evening to arrange for her to visit the facility and begin proper training under qualified supervision. The deplaning process gave them a few more precious minutes together as they gathered their belongings and prepared to part ways. Manny insisted that Mayumi keep her notebook exactly as it was, explaining that it represented one of the most impressive pieces of boxing education he had ever reviewed. He told her that her self-directed learning and training had given her a foundation that many formally trained boxers never develop. Her notebook was not just a collection of dreams, but evidence of the discipline and intelligence that would serve her well in any pursuit she chose to follow. Before leaving the aircraft, Manny arranged with Ligaya to ensure that Mayumi's grandmother would be informed about the conversation and the opportunities that had emerged from it. He also made arrangements for someone from his team to follow up within the week to begin coordinating her introduction to the training program and to discuss scholarship possibilities for her continued education. The practical steps he was taking demonstrated that his emotional response to her story was being translated into concrete action. As they walked through the terminal together, with Mayumi's grandmother waiting at the arrival gate, Manny reflected on how this young girl had unknowingly given him a gift, more valuable than any prize he had ever received. She had reminded him of the power of dreams to sustain hope through the darkest circumstances, and of his responsibility to ensure that talent and determination were not wasted due to lack of opportunity. Her courage in sharing her story had renewed his own sense of purpose and commitment to the work that mattered most. The final moments of their encounter took place as Mayumi reunited with her grandmother, an elderly woman whose face showed both joy at seeing her granddaughter and amazement at the circumstances of their meeting. Manny explained briefly about Mayumi's remarkable dedication and potential, ensuring that her family understood the opportunities that lay ahead. As he watched them leave the terminal together, Mayumi clutching both her original notebook and the new contact information he had provided, Manny felt certain that he had just witnessed the beginning of a story that would inspire many others. The little girl who had brought him to tears with her dreams was about to discover that those dreams were not only possible, but inevitable, given the foundation of character and commitment she had already built. Their chance encounter on a routine flight had become a moment of transformation for both of them, proving once again that the most important victories often happen far from any arena or stage. If you like this story, leave your like and subscribe to our channel.